I'm Don Moss, the Dean of the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences, and it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers for the evening, Drs. Aletha Williams and Drs. Allison Winters. I will be introducing Dr. Aletha Williams first. She is a U.S. Navy veteran, a trauma-informed healer, a community-based artist, and a mind-body practitioner. She earned a PhD in mind-body medicine at Saybrook and is the author of a dissertation on somatic restoration through equine experiential learning. Her work has been featured by America's VetDogs, BehindBarz, and Tango Alpha Lima. I welcome her to begin her presentation.
Good evening, everyone. It's been a pleasure to see you guys again. I see some very familiar faces out there. So I'm going to just minimize my screen. I believe I'm still sharing. Let me know if everybody can see this with a verbal, because I just minimized my screen.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So without further ado, not to waste anyone's time, I want to say, first of all, good evening and go Navy, beat Army, because it is this weekend. Without further ado, my dissertation was on the experience of somatic restoration aided by equine experiential learning in healing trauma. It was broken down in three parts. Part 1 covered chapters 1 to 3. Part 2 covered chapter 4. And part 5 covered chapter 5, which talks about the relevance to existing literature, the limitations, implications, and future research, where part 2 talks about chapter 4 about the data analysis and the results. I'm going to brace through the part 2 because the literature review was so extensive, and there's a reason behind that, and I will explain that as we go along. The topic of this study, as I said, was about somatic restoration aided by horses. How can we help trauma survivors to restore the embodied feeling in their bodies, aided by horses, without activating their trauma? And the purpose was to explore co-researchers' lived experience with equine experiential learning, to understand how this somatic restoration impact their well-being, and to explore the importance of that embodiment or felt sense on how to facilitate it using EEL, to analyze the patterns of transformation through the creative process. And the significance of the study was to contribute relevant and useful research to support the well-being of trauma survivors. I use an extensive engine search using Google Scholar, ProQuest, and the A through Z database to research what was out there about experiential learning. There was not much on experiential learning at all. There was some on equine therapy. There were some out there about the understanding the role of a horse and as a lead facilitator and therapist. I reviewed how trauma affected the mind, body, and the spirit, as well as the type of treatment for trauma. I also examined the historical relationship between humans and horses. As you can see, the citations will be available in the references at the end. I explored the importance of somatic restorations in healing. The insights was provided into the efficiency of experiential learning in treating trauma based on its ability to create safety for the client and support the restoration of somatic sensations to the body. The literature review revealed a gap in research consistency and the robustness. There was just not enough information about EEL in relevancy to the vocabulary or the methodology, the method of how it was carried out. So I decided to use Heuristic Inquiry majorly because of its explorative and holistic methods. It's reflective, humanistic, and relational, creative, nonlinear, and experiential methods. Using HI allowed me space to discover the impacts nature and animal-based experiential learning through the lived experience and personal narrative had on the co-researchers. And I use the word co-researchers because the participants were there to help me create what came out of my research. The 6 phases of HI were used multiple times. Data collection consisted of 10 co-researchers, 6 weeks of EEL on a farm, 1 sessions per week. Co-researchers were asked to journal after each week. A pre-session and a post-session interview of 90 minutes each. Videos of each co-researcher's sessions 4 through 6, except 1. Journals collected after post-sessions interview, except for 1 co-researcher. And with that exception of 1, that did not affect the data. The data analyzed using an ARCH, Arenas for Change, storytelling framework, and Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey 3-phase analysis. I created individual word portraits. Then I created a composite word portrait. And that provided me the ability to use tacit knowledge through art. One of the hardest things that happened during my research and data collection was that my hard drive crashed and triggered my own trauma, causing a huge wave of frustration. And as I worked through the frustration, I gained insight about the possibility that co-researchers also experience frustration. I emailed each of them inquiring if how frustration played in their process of the 6 weeks of equine experiential learning. I want to go over this methodology overview, how it compared to the creative process. And the reason why I said heuristic inquiry appealed to me, because it appealed to the creative process, which is how I use art as a way to explain my research. The 6 phases, as you can see, is inside of this creative process, where the creative process is initial, incubation, illumination, and verification. My findings was that all co-researchers experience at least 3 adverse childhood experiences. All co-researchers self-reported experiencing a traumatic event that affected their well-being. All co-researchers were seeking healing and inner peace. And gender identities representatives were transgender, non-binary, and cisgender female. Safety and vulnerability played a big role in the success of this research. 9 out of 10 co-researchers felt safe accessing emotional bodies through the experiential learning. Transgender and non-binary participants preferred structured, traditional therapy sessions, and somatic safety enabled deeper emotional access. Having the horses, the mental health practitioners, and the equine specialists be present during the session created a sense of community. So as I framed the findings around Joseph Campbell's and the ARCH storytelling framework, the exploration of each co-researcher's transformation allowed me to discover that 8 out of 10 co-researchers reported a somatic shift. They described the shift as validating their essence and value. Common themes that showed up were frustration, sacred witnessing, intuition, acceptance. Other recurring themes that showed up were the characters. As in ARCH framework, you have characters, and the characters were horses, healing, trauma, permitted witness. Frustration as the antagonist, compassion and permission served as the bridge to transformation. And this is my Venn diagram of all the word searches, words gathered after the interviews. These were words that overlapped each other from all 10 co-researchers. As you can see in the middle, compassion and permission interlapped with with the three characters. I use a character trauma, horses, and heal. So in the previous slide, I said the characters were horses, healing, trauma, and permitted witness. I did not include permitted witness in this because it did not give me enough information to overlap. But the other three characters, trauma, horses, and heal, provided me with enough information to continue with what revealed itself at the end of my research. And so compassion and permission intersected with all three characters. Other things that intersected were being present, connection, intuition, mind, body, spirit, sacred witness, self-love, vulnerable, boundaries, observation, and safe. And so to the left of this diagram, I put in each category heal, trauma, horses, and sacred witness, the things that came out of the pre and post session interviews. And I want to go down to box 4 where we talked about that fourth character. Permission to acknowledge, accept, and act on what became true to them as it was revealed in each session. They gave themselves permission to acknowledge, accept, and act. This diagram explained Joseph Campbell's, I'm trying to get this out of the way, the hero's journeys broken down into 3 categories, but also into 12 steps. The first row talks about the departure. The second row talks about initiation. And the third row talks about the return. But each row has steps that tells you that I am departing from the ordinary world. The second row of my initiation, I'm going into a special world. And then the third, I'm returning back to the ordinary world after I've gone through all that I've had to do. I've gone to my innermost cave to deal with my ordeal. And now I'm able to come back out and with a change to handle what I need to go back to the ordinary world to take care of. And each participant went through these 12 steps. The arch version of this, the reason why I emphasize the 3 departure, initiation, and return is when you look at the arch framework, it talks about 3 phases. It talks about my current state. It talks about the middle of the arch, where it's the messy middle. And then it talks about the change or transformation as I go through the arch. Just in comparison to Campbell, where Campbell says, in my current state, I'm departing from the ordinary world. And in my initiation, I'm going through my messy middle. I'm going through my trials. And then I'm going to I'm going to return back to the ordinary world with a change or transformation. And in my findings, using Campbell's and again, the arch storytelling framework, I discovered that separation was initially the first thing that showed up for each co-researcher. Their initial resistance and frustration and uncertainty showed up. In the initiation, safety, vulnerability, and witnessing. And in the return phase, validation, self-trust, and transformation came out. The call to adventure starts with the beginning of transformation. 6 weeks of the EEL process served as a catalyst for change. Frustration as a signal for deeper unresolved trauma, and the hero's initial resistance due to fear or doubt. As they crossed the threshold, their acceptance to the call, they found themselves in the middle of their memories while also watching the process instead of being mirrored in it. And in the messy middle, they began to confront frustration and in reflection and problem solving as core elements of the journey. Immediate feedbacks came from the horses. And this is very important. Here is the horses or the therapists. And in the Arenas for Change framework, the mental health practitioner and the equine specialist remain outside of the story of the co-researcher. The horse and the co-researchers are the only two inside of the story. We are to stay outside of it and be as safety monitors in case there should be an interaction where we need to interact for safety matters only. So as they get immediate feedback from the horses, they were able to, without judgment and feeling safe, able to get that feedback. And as CR4, this unique journey talks about disconnecting versus embracing change. That became one of the strongest stories that showed up in the research. The innermost cave, where they're facing deep fears, they began confronting unresolved trauma. The horses taught them how to practice self-compassion, self-care, and self-love during frustration. Many of them did not even know how it felt in their body. And how the horses taught them how to do that was by simply showing them energetically how it felt through exercises that were done during each session. It allowed them to build confidence to manage their emotions. In the ordeal step, they began releasing suppressed emotions, and they began breaking the cycle of their suppressions. They began learning resilience, and they began to embrace frustration as part of their healing. Several co-researchers said, frustration became their friend instead of their enemy. And in the return phase, they became more empowered and transformed. They restored emotional regulation and stronger sense of self-awareness. And they were ready to face that final challenge with newfound strength. And this is where the mental health practitioner and the ES comes in at the end of this return phase, where they present to them that they are now the narrator of their story. They can edit their story before they leave the 6 weeks of the experiential learning. And so as each co-researcher are able to narrate their story, they began to release their grief, and they began to rewrite their personal stories and set intentions before they leave. And they were able to feel that they had a social support system from the horse, the mental health practitioner, from the equine therapy, and from the facility itself. And so grieving the death of old stories became so important to them, and creating and editing new purpose-driven narratives became the new person, the new transformation that came out of this experience. And somatically, they began to connect to themselves, and a stillness, a peace was discovered. And as they do this through reflection in their journals, each co-researcher told me that they began reconnecting with their bodies through the stillness and allow space for grief and calling forward parts of themselves to heal. The integration and new patterns, as they began to embrace this change, they began to accept and act on new patterns. They began to accept and establish healthier relational bonds and focusing on heart-centered living. And this is my composite reflection of the post-session interviews. And if you look at this, it's color-coded for a purpose. And this is where my creative process came into this research. Red talks about rooted, your root chakra, your lower dantian of the energy centers. Red says, I am safe. I am not running away. I feel safe in my body. So even though it says heart, red says I am safe. So the heart itself is where everything changed for each co-researchers. When they began to feel feel their emotions in their heart. They were able to acknowledge in the green. Green talks about the color therapy. When you talk about color therapy, green talks about healing and releasing, and purple talks about structure, strength, and support. And the yellow inside of the purple talks about memory, good memories, in memory of, in honor of. And the white talks about cleansing or removing of that which no longer serves. And so as I created this composite reflection based on the interview and the words that came out that intersected each other, this is what came from the research. And so the heart was where it started. And as they began to feel, they were able to acknowledge the unknown, befriend the unknown, release, act, allow themselves to grieve, accept their state of mind and responsible for their part, boundaries, and connection. And if you look at the lines, each of them has some more description. For instance, acknowledgement. They were able to acknowledge that they were not alone. Some of them were able to acknowledge that there was no purpose in what was going on in their life right now. Some of them acknowledged that they were overwhelmed. Some of them acknowledged that there is pain or hurt. Some of them acknowledged the truth that they were confused. Another part about acting, a lot of them were able to act and find a way forward. And so as they felt this community, they were able to learn through the horses the feedback that they see in the purple. They were able to feel safe. They were able to be present. They were able to feel validated. They were able to trust their intuition. They were able to feel self-love. They were able to feel self-care. And that's what the horses provide. What was in the yellow, the purple, that's what the horses provide. And with that surrounding energy, they were able to really feel in their heart and heal. And as they started to heal inside, the outside also began to change. And as a result, I created a poem that I don't think I have time to read, but I want to finish with the discussions. The ARCH framework illuminated the findings of self-discovery, compassion, and empowerment. As each experienced in present tense what occurred in their body, they began to feel hopeful. The EEL experienced hold transformative potential for somatic restoration, and the permitted witnessing and compassion acts as a catalyst for healing, giving themselves permission to witness themselves heal or themselves being vulnerable began that catalyst for their healing. That deep connection between co-researchers and the equine partners allowed for discovery and facilitation of healing growth through introspection and self-dialogue. Two co-researchers utilized me as a mentor because I had the same skin color as they did. Unlike traditional talk therapy, which often relies on cognitive processing and verbal recall of trauma, EEL provided an alternative way, a pathway that engaged the body's innate wisdom. It fostered nonverbal communication and supported emotional regulation through presence and attunement. That attunement piece where they had to tune into their own bodies as the horses give them feedback whether the horse felt safe to be around them or not. That immediate biofeedback gave them an attunement to say, okay, I need to slow my breath down. I need to become present. I'm not present because the horse is walking away from me. That attunement allowed them to learn how to emotionally regulate themselves and become present in the moment for each session. The integration of intuition, tacit knowledge, and community support into therapeutic practices may offer promising directions for a more holistic approach to trauma recovery. And using the hero's journey as a roadmap to emotional growth, self-awareness, and emotional empowerment provided an unexpected clarification to this process. EEL provided a unique container for co-researchers' safety and vulnerability. The creative process deepened my data analysis and understanding. And through this work, the field of trauma recovery can continue to evolve, offering more holistic and accessible pathways to healing. EEL offers a compassionate and integrative approach that empowers individuals to reclaim their sense of self, rebuild trust, and embrace healing as an ongoing journey. Limitation to the study. Time was an influential factor. The small sample size also limited generalization and the subjectivity in the description. Potential influences of the researchers' participant relationship also affected the study, and then funding was a big factor in limiting the study. Implications. This study calls for more inclusive, embodied, and community-centered approaches to trauma therapy that recognizes the body's ability to self-heal with the support of meaningful social connections, restoration of the felt self, the integration of intuition and nonverbal physical interaction. The transformative power of receiving non-judgmental feedback from horses became a powerful catalyst that facilitated a shift in mindset. And the role of social support and safe spaces in self-discovery created a sense of community. Somatic practices facilitated reconnection with individuals with their authentic selves. My recommendation for future research is to expand the sample size, explore the mechanism behind EEL effectiveness, comparing its outcome with other experiential and nature-based therapies to refine its methodologies and expand its application, to also conduct longitudinal studies to track long-term impacts of its process, to do comparative studies with other trauma-informed interventions, and to conduct further future research is needed to expand accessibility and inclusivity. And a merger of possible therapeutic approaches may be necessary to help trauma survivors deal with its physiological, psychological, psychosocial, and the spiritual aspects of healing. Given the significant role that social support played in the study, future research should examine the broader impact of community-based healing interventions. I've already mentioned the longitudinal studies and the merger of therapeutic approaches. I also recommend explore how factors such as ethnicity influence trauma recovery in equine-assisted settings. And the findings open multiple avenues for future research, including evaluating the efficiency of EEL, exploring the role of community support, and conducting comparative studies with other trauma-focused interventions, and maybe applying broader applications of EEL across diverse populations. I want to end with this quote. EEL not only offers an alternative to traditional therapeutic methods, but also challenges people to rethink how they approach trauma recovery, emphasizing connection, being present, and accessing wisdom of the body as essential components of lasting transformation. And the references are included, and I just want to thank each and every one of you for listening.